Do You Know Them? Families Lost and Found After the Civil War. Written by Shana Keller, illustrated by Laura Freeman. After the war ended, everyone was missing someone. Letty was missing her family. They had been sold and lost long before enslavement was abolished. Were they looking for her too? Every day, Letty saved her pennies. To earn money, she helped Miss Ida sew. She swept the floors at Mr. Young's store. When Uncle Charlie came home from the docks, she helped him make ropes to sew. Then they practiced reading the newspaper. She didn't buy candy or toys. She saved for something better, something that would bring her whole family together. "Have you saved enough yet, Letty?" Miss Ida asked her in the mornings. "Almost," Letty said. "How many pennies have you got now?" Mr. Young asked her in the afternoons. 22, Mr. Young," Letty said as she swept. Every week, Letty read the advertisements in the newspapers with Uncle Charlie. She held on to them, and again she underlined the words she wanted to use in her own ad. As she grew older, Letty learned to read on her own, but a lot of people couldn't, so she read to the congregation at church. She read every advertisement and imagined her family listening to the same ads, waiting to hear from her and Uncle Charlie. "My wife's brother still works in the coal mines up in Wheeling," Mr. Young said. "That's not too far from Brownsville. We'll send a letter and find out." Letty wondered if her brothers worked in the coal mines, or maybe they worked on the docks like Uncle Charlie. Wherever they were, she hoped they were still together. Folks didn't have much to go on, whether it was money or information, but Letty was glad everyone did what they could to help one another find their lost family members. She sure was missing hers. With a gentle nod from the pastor, Letty took a deep breath and continued reading. "Do you know them? I would like to find my people. My mother's name was Charlotte King, and when I was sold I had 5 brothers: Alfred, John, Reason, Robert, and Paul King. At the same time, they were sold to Seth Woodruff, a trader. My mother was sold to Mr. Hunter at Campbell Court House. I have been living in Hopkinsville, Kentucky for 11 years. My name was Rose King. Any information will gladly be received by Miss Rose Caudle, Hopkinsville, Kentucky." Uncle Charlie looked up. Miss Ida did too. Letty wondered if they knew where any of the Kings might be. Just as her heart tightened up with too many feelings, Miss Ida spoke. "I knew a young man named Reason. The name stuck out." "It sure did," Uncle Charlie said, but he didn't look excited when he said it. "Miss Ida and I met him along one of the hidden routes. I believe he was on his way to England. Said he knew someone there who could help him start a new life," Uncle Charlie explained. "After his brothers died in an uprising, fighting for their freedom, he wanted to get as far away from this country as he could." Letty felt awful. There was so much she wanted to say, but all the words got stuck inside. "We'll send a message. Whether it's good news or bad, every little bit helps," the pastor said. Letty held the newspaper up high and read the next advertisement. This time her heart filled with happiness. She looked at her uncle with a blaze of hope burning in her eyes. "Found his father, Salt Lake City. Many thanks for the notice in seeking for the lost. Column, I found my father. Respectfully, S.G. Wilson." Applause erupted. "Hallelujah!" everyone shouted. "That's good news indeed," the pastor said. Tears were wiped and smiles lingered as joy soared through the room. "That wasn't cheap," Uncle Charlie said. "Each ad cost at least 50 cents. Letty knew. She kept track of how much each newspaper charged to place an advertisement for lost ones. But she also knew Mr. Wilson didn't spend his money on the notice just to say thank you. This was proof that the advertisements worked. This was why Letty had saved her pennies through all the weeks and months and years. She would find her family. Letty had to clear her throat several times before she could finish reading. When she sat back down, she didn't hear much else of what the pastor said. She held on to the papers like before, but this time she circled Mr. Wilson's entire ad again and again. The next morning, Letty walked to the office of the Richmond Planet. Her steps were as light as air even as she clutched a heavy treasure close to her heart. She handed a carefully folded piece of paper to Mr. Jones, the man at the desk. Then she opened her purse. For a moment, Letty could hardly breathe. The words on the paper, the copper coins she worked so hard for, they felt more valuable than gold. "Are you here to buy a paper, Letty?" Mr. Jones asked. Letty's smile was as bright as the sun, and her voice sang like the birds. "No, sir, I'm here to place an ad for Uncle Charlie and me," she said. "Did you hear? A man in Salt Lake City found his father?" "I did," Mr. Jones said, but his smile faltered. "I know what you're thinking," Letty said as she placed 50 pennies on the desk. Mr. Jones could see the determination in Letty's eyes. He didn't dare say one thing bad. "You give us hope, Letty," he said instead. Mr. Wilson's ad gave Letty hope. She held tight to that hope as she continued to work, save, and read. Her reading had improved, but sharing the ads was never easy. There were so many lost ones. Would she ever find her mother, her father, her brothers and sisters? Would Uncle Charlie ever find his wife and children? It took longer than Letty could have imagined, but one day as she stood in front of the congregation, an ad jumped out at her. Letty's hands shook. Letty could barely read through the tears that filled her eyes. She could barely speak. Uncle Charlie, she managed to say. "She knows them." Letty's whispers turned into a shout. "She knows them." "Hallelujah," the pastor cried. "Praise be," echoed the congregation. Uncle Charlie cried too as Letty read the ad again and again. She knows them. "Dear Sir, I saw an advertisement in your paper last week. One Charlie Oliver wants to find some of his relatives. I am well acquainted with all of his people who now live in King William County, Virginia. For further information, call at number 911 North 32nd Street, Miss R.W. Williams."